Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, friends, comrades, and distinguished guests. Bienvenue, bon après-midi à toutes et à tous, aux camarades et aux invités distingués.
On behalf of the European Left Party and the European Left Youth Network, welcome, bienvenue, bienvenidos y bienvenidas.
Many of you might have already seen our faces today. We are the co-coordinators of the European Left Youth Network, and we will be moderating today's event.
As my colleague said, we are the co-coordinators. I'm Daniel from the Youth of United Left in Spain. And by luck or by misfortune, we share this destiny in this organization, in the youth network of this great, great European party.
And I forgot to mention, my name is Anastasia. I'm from Luxembourg, from the Young Left Party. So before we begin, some short announcements. This event is divided into two parts, and we will run straight through without any breaks. Each session lasts approximately 30 minutes, and we will introduce the theme and the speakers at each part of the beginning. The speakers will only have 5 minutes to answer that question. Dear speakers, you will have a time master in the front row, so you'll know when you run out of time. But don't be offended if we interrupt you. We also have interpretations going on in French and Spanish. One of our speakers will speak in French, my apologies. So if you don't speak French, get a headset. Yes, and this is being recorded and live streamed. Woohoo, YouTube. Yes, so without further ado, let's start our first part, titled Disarm to Win the Future, Stop Militarization and Building Collective Security. None of us can ignore it. Fear-mongering and rhetorics of war are everywhere. Open a newspaper, scroll on your feed. If you watch TV, it's on TV. What do we hear? Panic, anxiety, escalation. We hear that the EU needs to become a geopolitical actor, that we need to learn the language of power. NATO now demands 5% of the GDP for military spending, a crushing burden that will fall on the shoulders, as always, of the working class. We are told that war is inevitable. This is, of course, a lie to fuel insecurity and to fill the pockets of arms dealers. And we can also not forget that we are Generation Gaza. Our generation, young people, are witnessing a genocide right in front of our eyes, in real life, on our screens. This is the first time that we witness violence on such a mass scale, and it's the first time it's being documented. Apologies. In the past, people could not claim that they did not know what was happening. Now, people cannot be ignorant. We know that we cannot bomb our way to peace, and this is the panel to disarm to win the future, not to disarm and hope for the best. Otherwise, there won't be a future. Before I get too cynical, let's move straight to the speakers. I will kindly ask Peter Mertens, Megan Romer, Jeremy Corbyn, and Ambassador Amal Jadou Shakaa to join the stage. Yes. You have your names on the chairs. Before I introduce them, for time efficiency, please applaud when I've introduced all of them, because we are in a time crunch. I'll introduce you while standing, it's fine. So, Peter Mertens is a passionate politician and a general secretary of the Workers' Party of Belgium. He is the author of the book Mutiny, which you have maybe seen in the hallway. And this book dissects the two faces of the war in Ukraine. Russian imperialism on one hand and NATO proxy war on the other. He has spent years on the front lines of the anti-militarist movements in Europe. He has went from the streets of Brussels to the floor of the Belgian Chambers of Representatives. He's a sharp critic of NATO, of the EU's 800 billion euros rearmament plan, and of course of the lie that workers must choose between social security and military security. Welcome, Peter. Then we welcome Megan Romer, the national co-chair of the Democratic Socialists of America, the largest socialist organization in the US. In a country where the military budget is larger than all of the nations here combined, here attending combined, and where the Trump administration is openly preparing for new wars, Megan and the DSA represent a growing movement of Americans who are fighting against US imperialism. Thank you for joining us, Megan. Then, of course, we have Jeremy Corbyn, a man who hardly needs an introduction, but we will introduce him anyway. He's a long-standing member of Parliament. He's the former leader of the Labour Party, the founder of the Peace and Justice Project, and the founder of your party. For decades, Jeremy has been the conscience of British politics, opposing war, nuclear escalation, and every austerity measure that makes people pay for the crisis of the rich. He has been smeared and sidelined, but he has never surrendered his principles. Jeremy, it's an honor to have you with us. And finally, it goes without saying that all of us, all the speakers, everyone here, we stand in solidarity with Gaza, and we want a free Palestine. And today we have the profound privilege of hearing directly from someone who represents Palestine on the world stage. We welcome Dr. Amal Jadou, Shakaa, the Palestinian ambassador to the EU, Belgium, and Luxembourg. She has held... Yes? She has held this position since 2024 and became the first woman to hold multiple positions in Palestinian diplomacy. We express our deepest solidarity with you and with every Palestinian person who has been enduring over 7 decades of dispossession, occupation, and now systemic slaughter. We express and we share your outrage that the same European institutions that host you continue to arm and trade with Israel and continue to call for restraints while bombs are falling. And Ambassador, your name, Amal, means hope. And in the face of despair, in the face of genocide, and this diplomatic hypocrisy, most people would break, but you remain. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Now applause. So, we have 3 socialists here and 1 diplomat, but of course, all 4 of them are diplomats of peace. We'll start with Peter. Peter, as we heard from your opening speech yesterday, you're not a big fan of Ursula von der Leyen. No big surprise? She says, and I quote, "The founding mission of the EU is to preserve peace. That means having the capacity to aggress." End quote. She's literally defining peace as rearmament. You're rightfully so to criticize her militaristic rhetorics. So, I ask you, with war at Europe's doorstep and NATO allies pushing for higher defense budgets, how do we make the case for anti-militarism without being accused of naivety? The floor is yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me on the panel. Going back to 1945, at the Conference of Yalta, there was an agreement after the defeat of fascism, never again, nie wieder. And there was also another agreement. The Allied forces were agreeing that also the roots of militarism should be destroyed. And in the Conference of Yalta, they defined 5 Ds as roots of fascism, meaning to combat fascism: democratization, decentralization, demilitarization, denazification, and demonopolization. 5 Ds, 1945. And there was so a broad understanding, even among Christian Democrats in Germany, that there was a link between capitalism, monopolism, expansionism, militarism, fascism, and war. There is a link between that. And today in Europe we've seen with Ursula von der Leyen exactly the contrary, because instead of democratization, we have more authoritarianism. Instead of decentralization, we have more centralization on the European level. Instead of demilitarization, there is a fever of militarization in Europe. And instead of breaking up big monopolies, the European Union wants to strengthen them. So exactly the opposite of 1945 happening. And we do know that in Europe, every crisis is a step to get more power centralized in Brussels at one hand, and at the same time, there will be more contradictions. We have seen that during the banking crisis in 2008. We have seen that during the European crisis 2011, during the COVID crisis 2022. Every crisis, there's more power to Brussels. The same recipe again and again. And now we're seeing the same thing happening with defense. Defense, it is a competence of the sovereign nations of Europe. And we know it was already ongoing with small budgets, but now there is 850 million euro of the European rearm plan. That's a turbo. And so there is centralization and at the same time more contradiction. Germany wants to build the biggest army in Europe. Germany wants to spend militarization by debt, on debt. They eliminated the Schuldenbremse. They want to spend every year in 4 years for 153 billion euro on military spending. And there's no other country in Europe that can follow that speed of Germany. And so the contradictions with France become bigger and bigger. Of course, France, they have the nuclear arms, but with more centralization in Europe, there is also more contradictions also at the same time in Europe. And so, on top of that, we are also seeing that Europe is depending on the United States. And after Trump threatened to take Greenland from Europe, some of the European leaders said, okay, we need an autonomous Europe. And of course, we need to break up with the US, but it is not enough, dear comrades and dear friends, because if we break up with the United States, it is to do exactly what? We do not need a European army to copy the US army. We do not need a European army that is intervening all over the world to secure raw materials and supply routes. We do not need a European army and frigates to the Persian Gulf to control trade routes, military vehicles to Congo to plunder the cobalt, drones to Niger to secure uranium for the French nuclear plants. We don't need an imperialist army in Europe. We need a defense strategy, a protection strategy, and not an imperialist army in Europe, dear comrades and friends. So yes, I will conclude. We need an autonomous Europe, but a different Europe, because this system is barbaric. And I really don't use that word every year, but it is barbaric. It is barbaric against the Palestinians. It is barbaric against the Iranians. It is barbaric against the Lebanese. This is a barbaric imperialist system. We need a complete other system. We need a socialist system. We need a socialist future. Europe can only survive if we create all together a social Europe. And we should be proud, because imperialism, that's the forces of defeat, that's the forces of the past. We are representing the forces of the future, the proud forces of the future. So we should be proud to be Marxist, to be communist, to be socialist, because we are the future for humanity as socialist forces. Thank you very much.
Wow, it's going to be difficult to speak after that marvelous discourse. And now we jump the ocean and we go to the center of the global imperialism. So, Megan, not your case, but your country. The US government cut social spending while increasing military budgets. DSA is fighting against that logic in many, many fronts. How do you build this alternative to militarism when it's so deeply embedded in the state and in the mentality of a lot of many Americans? And what do you think in Europe we should learn about your struggle, that it's a really difficult struggle? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our moderators and to our hosts here in Brussels. I am honored to join you here today as we speak about the two tasks that form the structure of this event: to fight austerity and stop militarization. The US ruling class knows that austerity and militarism are linked. The federal government has withdrawn social services with massive cuts and brought its military apparatus to the interior with ICE occupations in our cities, in our airports, and in our homes. Earlier this month, Donald Trump told a luncheon audience that funding social services is not possible and that we have to take care of one thing: military protection. Protection, defense, security, these are euphemisms that naturalize a harsh, man-made reality. We are destroying each other and making our entire planet unlivable because we cannot confront global inequalities and envision a future without war. In the US, we know that our own military and national security apparatus is the high command for this assault on humanity. It's the supervillain holding civilization at gunpoint. A collective security is predicated on the drawdown of these forces. It's why we, the 106,000 members of the Democratic Socialists of America, fight alongside the labor and social movements for the closure of US bases abroad and organize for the withdrawal of ICE from our own communities. We fight to keep refugees, migrants, and political prisoners out of the global carceral network that prison profiteers have delivered to the global neo-fascist alliance. We fight for a divestment from Israel's apartheid apparatus, whether that's direct military funding or so-called security partnerships. We fight to end the economic sanctions that impact the sovereignty of countries whose governments act independently of the US, such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran. We applaud those leaders of state, as well as the social forces on the ground, who've had the courage to refuse complicity in US-led crimes against humanity. From workers' leaderships of strikes and blockades at ports to keep weapons out of the hands of war criminals, to some nations' complete refusal to participate in yet another American misadventure in the Middle East. We see these acts of principled resistance to militarism, and we are inspired to act in kind. However tenuous this moment feels, we are reminded that another world is indeed possible, and we must work urgently to bring it to bear. Many of us in this room grew up in societies locked in an uneasy social truce between social democratic struggles from below and an expanding military apparatus, a truce that is now dissolving. It is easy for us to forget that militarism is not easily severable from the good parts of government. Militarism is a cancer that has metastasized and spread across the whole body. And as we organize in the United States, we will hold the lesson of the 20th century close to our hearts. To win a truce is no victory at all. We must not just seek to make our societies more equal through small acts of redistribution. We must invest in the kinds of projects, forge the international bonds of solidarity that make global peace possible. We don't just need a renewed spirit of international solidarity, but a new project of international solidarity to lift up together. We must be part of the human chain for survival that ends the slaughter and genocide we are witnessing for good. We must dismantle, piece by piece and with great haste, the architecture of destruction that tears life asunder across the globe. This is the necessary condition for a decent human existence, free of want, toiling together for the common good, the thing that poet and martyr Victor Jara called el derecho de vivir en paz. It is only through a final victory against militarism that we can win a final victory against austerity.
And before continuing with Jeremy, we want to put you a video that European Left make for our European Left election campaign about the topic of peace and stop militarization that we think that it's really pertinent now.
¿Sabías que el precio de la vivienda en Europa ha aumentado los últimos 10 años de un 50%? ¿Y sabías que el precio del alquiler ha aumentado un 30% en ese tiempo? Hoy, para una familia trabajadora, pagar el alquiler o la hipoteca no es un proyecto de vida, es una carrera de obstáculos. Es la principal preocupación, es la principal causa de endeudamiento.
Yes, I do rent. I pay $800 for a small studio in a co-living.
Oh, but there's... Okay, so next with with Jeremy.
It's not on. Ah, sorry. That was a shame that we didn't get to see the video, but we'll move on with Jeremy. Jeremy, I've been a militant for many years, for advocating for peace and for the end of nuclear weapons. And what is really inspiring that you moved from being an activist to leading the discourse. I want to ask you about activism and protests. So we have seen repression and criminalization of activism and protests, notably in the UK, but also in Netherlands and in Germany. How should we face these authoritarian measures and fight for our democracy and for our right to protest? Thank you.
Mine just worked.
You have to...
Borrow your one.
Is that working? Oh, good. First of all, thank you very, very much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And it's the title we need is what we're doing today, which is essentially trying to turn the world away from warfare onto the needs of people and welfare. And I hope we're going to get a massive turnout for the European demonstration on June the 14th here. But also, if I could invite you as well, on June the 20th in London, we're holding a huge conference, International Anti-War Conference at Central Hall, Westminster, which is an iconic venue, and it's the place where the first General Assembly of the UN took place in 1946. And so I invite you all to come to that, because that is, to me, absolutely important. We are under the cosh on the left, under the cosh because of the growth of the far right across Europe. We're under the cosh because of the way in which the right-wing media all across Europe attack us. But look at what's happened over the past 2.5 years. The numbers of people across Europe who've turned out on demonstrations in support of the Palestinian people. Hundreds of thousands, nay, millions across Europe have done something in support of the Palestinian people. It's brought together people from all walks of life and a very wide persuasion of broadly left political opinions. We've got to continue that, we've got to expand that and continue doing it, because we are the only voice that's speaking out for the Palestinian people all the time. Not one government around the world is actually a reliable ally of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people need friends and they need support. They don't need us telling them what to do. They need our solidarity so they can decide their own future. And that is something we have to continually do. And the power of the arms lobby, which has funded and encouraged political parties all over Europe and North America, has brought about this massive level of arms expenditure, and increasingly so in the United States. And in my country, the government, which was elected, it claimed on a program of social justice, in reality is cutting social spending, cutting local authority expenditure, and planning to raise defense expenditure immediately to 3% of GDP, rising to 5%. And indeed, the Secretary of State for Welfare herself said we had to cut £5 billion of the welfare budget in order to increase arms expenditure. That led to a kickback, and that hasn't happened yet. But that is the agenda they're working on. A warfare economy, an arms industry economy, as if the world doesn't need a cut in arms expenditure. Last year, global arms expenditure reached $2.7 trillion. This year, it'll go over $3 trillion and continue to rise. About half of that is by the US, but it's increasing everywhere. And with it is increasing the power of nuclear weapons and nuclear armament. And next week starts the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in New York. I don't have any very high hopes of it, but I will be there along with a lot of other peace organizations trying to argue the case for the global ban on nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons have brought us environmental destruction and desperate poverty in Congo, Niger, and many other places, have brought us the deaths of millions of people around the world from nuclear fallout and nuclear testing, and now bring us the problems of nuclear waste and nuclear waste disposal all around the world, and actually increase the dangers all around the world. In all this issues of arms expenditure, do not forget that they are all, the 5 declared nuclear weapon states, in breach of the NPT by their rearmament program. We have to be resolute against nuclear weapons just as much as we're resolute against the increase in arms expenditure as a whole. And the way in which high technology is taken over in the case of warfare. AI-generated bombing raids over Gaza. AI-generated imprisonment of individuals and murdering of individuals, Palestinians in Gaza, has all come from the most incredible high technology stuff used by the US, by Israel, by Britain, and by other European countries against a population that is unarmed, defenseless, and essentially very, very poor. That is the reality of what global economic power is against the poorest people in the world. It's used against the Palestinians, it's used against people in Iran, in Lebanon, and it's threatened to be used against the people of Cuba. And so we have to be that voice for social justice around the world. And so when the governments of Europe recognize that Donald Trump possibly has a more America First agenda than any other US president has ever had. He also put forward a US security strategy which essentially said, we'll do what the hell we like in the Western Hemisphere, we'll take what the hell we like out of Africa, we'll confront any country that gets in our way where we're after their natural resources, and we will be the global economic and military power. That is what Trump's agenda is. Europe does not need to develop an alternative to NATO. Europe does not need militarization, does not need conscription, does not need investment in an arms industry that's already burgeoning across Europe. What Europe needs is investment in social needs and social justice and a trade policy with Africa, Latin America, and South Asia that is fair on those countries, not exploitative of those countries. Our solidarity has to be to bring about global social justice. And to defend those people that are speaking up against war. In the 19th century, the working class movements across Europe came together to try and oppose the march into the First World War. The leaders of those movements either died or assassinated. Think of Liebknecht, think of Rosa Luxemburg, think of Juarez, and think of the death of Keir Hardie from a heart attack shortly after the start of the First World War. Those visionary people had a view of a continent and a working class movement that brought people together for peace and for justice and for sharing of wealth. We need exactly those same principles now all across this continent to confront the psychology of war and the psychology of militarism which is being drummed into our young people by the media and by the growth of the far right and the racism on the rise and anti-refugee sentiments on the rise all across Europe. Our cause has to be support the victims of war, the Palestinian people in particular. But above all, be prepared to go out there and bravely say, we will not invest in more arms, more weapons of mass destruction, and more killing of the innocents around the world. Instead, we will invest in defending the poorest of this planet, in confronting the challenge of the environmental disaster that we're faced with, and confronting the psychological disaster which has been pushed upon us by the rise of the far right all around the world. We've nothing to do but be active, be out there, and be very determined. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And now we have the right video, so please, let's go.
There are those who want to turn Europe into a war machine. And although they justified hiding behind values like democracy and freedom, their sole interest is profit. Those who claim to defend Europe